Hey you, subscribe and click the notification bell, and you'll never miss another scary story. And maybe even buy some of my merch below, so I can continue my Slim Jim habit. Thanks. People naturally want to be a part of a group. We are social creatures after all. But not every group people create or join is heartwarming, tolerant, or even sane. These are 5 allegedly true stories from people who survived terrifying encounters with horrific cults. If you want your story heard, go to darknessprevails.org and write your story today. Cult Recruitment by Noel T. If you want to confirm the trueness of this story, you can check the link in the description. Before this incident occurred, I had heard about similar occurrences happening in the city and town near where I lived, but I honestly never thought it would happen to me. I live in Malaysia, and I attend college in a development area where there are 4 high-profile, high-density, tertiary education institutions. To put it simply, in this area, there are hundreds of college kids roaming between classes and after school. I guess that's what makes the cult target this area, though they're far from the least savory crowd that targets these kids. A few weeks before this happened, I saw on Facebook a post by a woman in the area warning others about possible cult activity. The woman who made the post detailed that 2 Korean women approached her, asking if she believed in God the Mother and if she wanted to come for a Bible study group to find out more. But when the woman declined, the 2 women began to pressure her more, getting closer to her physically, until she had to quickly leave the place. They seemed rather aggressive for religious people. I had warily regarded the article, but I figured that you hear things like this from time to time, and it couldn't possibly happen to me, right? My nonchalance convinced me that there was nothing to worry about, and of course the worst happened. Normally, I'd go to the nearby mall with my best friend to grab a meal after class or to study, but on that day, I'd gone alone. I bought myself a drink and headed to the cafe I usually frequented to finish the last of my assignments. On the way there, I was occupied by my phone and only looked up to make sure I didn't bump into anyone as I walked. Looking back, I'm sure my obliviousness to my surroundings made me an obvious target. I was in a lonely section of the mall when someone tapped my shoulder. I looked up, startled. I found 3 women standing in front of me. They looked like they were in their late teens or early 20s. They were definitely East Asian, Chinese, or Korean. This didn't ring any alarm bells, as Malaysia has people of all Asian ethnicities. I asked if I dropped something, and they didn't answer. One of them waved and introduced herself, though the name she gave was clearly fake, as it was something akin to green petal in Mandarin. At first, she said that they were part of a group of students doing a project, which I admit got me interested. As a struggling student myself, I'm always happy to help with others' surveys and projects. As the woman kept talking, I began to feel uncomfortable. There had definitely been only 3 women earlier, but now there were 5 altogether surrounding me on all sides. I have pretty bad anxiety, and the feeling of being closed in with unfamiliar people made my heart pound nervously, and I wasn't even paying attention to what the girl was talking about at that point. I'm sorry, but I can't help," I stuttered nervously, trying desperately to find a way out of the situation. At this point, I still didn't know what it was all about, but I was sure that whatever was happening was not good. The women tried to sway my attention, talking about how important it was that they tell me what this was, and that they needed me to come to their group meeting with them to experience it for real. I was trying to calm myself down, telling them repeatedly that I was not interested in joining their club or group, and I could not help their little project. It was then that the woman who'd initially approached me, their leader I'm assuming, said something that sent chills down my spine and made me realize the severity of what was happening. We just want to know if you believe in God the Father. There is a Bible group meeting tonight and tomorrow night if you want to come over and have some food and find out more. Other students will be there too." It may not have been the same wording exactly, but the similarities in the way I was approached by her and the woman who approached the girl I talked about before started to click in my mind. This was worse than I thought, and I knew I had to leave. I realized I still had my phone in my hand, and though I kept my eyes on the woman as to not tip them off that I was aware of their scheme, I managed to maneuver my way into faking a phone call. "Oh, I'm sorry," I pretended to be surprised. "My mother is calling me. I need to go." They protested, saying that I could call her back later, but I refused. I told them that my mother always wanted to know where I was, and if they wanted, I could put her on speakerphone, and they could speak to her about this project they wanted me to be involved in. This confirmed my suspicions about their motives, as they immediately shied away and began making up excuses. As soon as they backed away enough, I turned and sprinted toward the closest escalator, practically running down and going to the closest store with other people around. I felt like I was going to have a panic attack, but the adrenaline rush was keeping me going. I sat down in front of the store, dialing my mom's number and keeping tabs on a friendly-looking woman dressed in the store's uniform, who was at most 10 feet away from me, while my gaze darted frantically around as I tried to make sure the group of women did not come to find me. When my mom answered the call, I just about burst into tears right there. I told her everything over small sobs. She calmed me down and told me to get something to eat and that she'd come and get me so I wouldn't have to catch the bus and train home that day. I never realized just how harrowing an experience being approached and cornered like that can be, and I definitely know that I take my usual normal routines for granted. When I got home, I shared the original post and added a summary of my experience to warn others in the area of what was going on. Since then, there have been disappearances, and I can almost guarantee you they were taken by groups or cults like that one, and they may never see their families again. That was nearly me. Satanic Cult Encounter by Super Swampert 96. This is the story of mine and my brother's potential encounter with a satanic cult. Let me start off by saying I've lived in the country my entire life. I spend a lot of time in the woods, mainly hunting deer and coyotes. I live in southern Ohio with my father and younger brother, about 40 miles east of Cincinnati, and about 4 miles north of the Ohio River. The closest town to us is about 10 minutes away, but this is still an extremely rural area. We live in a small house on a back road that doesn't get very much traffic, which is strange considering the road is right off a state route, Route 505. There's also a few large farms with lots of big fields in the area. Down the road from my house, there is a dead-end gravel road called Marriott Road. Nothing on it besides a couple of houses. It's pretty much just a big driveway. Further down from that is a popular swimming hole that my brother and my friends have always called Bullskin Creek. The place is absolutely beautiful in the summertime, and my buddy, who had a lifted Jeep Cherokee, and I, who had a lifted Ford Ranger at the time, would always go down there and drive through the shallow part of the creek. The only downsides to this place was that people would always dump old garbage there. Couches, mattresses, televisions, you name it. The other was something more unsettling, which we'll get into soon. At the time this happened, my younger brother was still in high school, and I had recently graduated. My father worked the third shift at GE in a suburb of Cincinnati, so he was always gone at night. I worked a part-time second shift job at a local Kroger, from 3 to 11 at night, depending on what got done before I got there. One night, in the middle of June of 2015, I'd gotten off work at 1 in the morning. I had a half-hour drive from work back to home ahead of me, and I had the next day off, so I wasn't really in a rush. I went into the employee restroom to change out of my uniform shirt, back into my flannel shirt, and went to go buy a Monster, as well as a can of dipping tobacco and a pack of cigarettes. As I was walking out to my truck, my phone began to ring. I pulled it out and saw that my brother was calling me. So I answered, and I could barely understand what he was saying. He was breathing frantically and was speaking in almost complete gibberish. "Dude, calm down. I can't understand a word you're saying," I told him. He caught his breath for a moment, then said our friends John and Damon had just gotten back from Bullskin. They had decided to start a fire and drink a couple of beers and smoke some cigarettes. He told me they had taken John's Ram truck back there, parked it by the creek bed, and got a fire going. He told me to get home as quickly as possible and that it was an emergency. I could hear John and Damon talking in the background. I made the drive home in no time at all, even though it felt like an eternity. My mind was racing the whole way home, wondering what was going on. Now, remember earlier when I said there were a couple of bad things about Bullskin? Well, the other thing was that when I was a kid, there was a young orphan whose young life was stolen by his foster parents. They tied him up, locked him in a closet for days while they went out of town. Marriott Road is where the police found the kid's burned remains. Anyway, I arrived home and walked inside. It was about 1:20 in the morning. I saw my brother, John, and Damon sitting in the living room, all completely pale in color. John was clutching his crossbow that he kept in the back of his truck, and Damon was gripping a large pipe wrench, also from the inside of John's truck. I asked what happened, and my brother stood up and told me that while they were having their fire, they began to hear screaming in the woods in the direction of Marriott Road, where the aforementioned orphan's remains were found. I told him it was probably just a pack of coyotes, and that out of fear they were blowing the whole thing out of proportion. But before I could finish my sentence, he cut me off and said they went to check it out. Now, my brother was the only one who wasn't buzzed at the time, so they all jumped into John's truck and drove onto my road to get to Marriott. He told me they got halfway down the road when they began to hear the screaming again. He told John to aim his floodlight in the direction of the screaming, and when he did, they saw 4 people dressed in jet black cloaks. They were standing about 30 feet from the road off in the woods. They then told me that my brother threw the truck into reverse, backed into a small clearing, and floored it away. They were obviously scared and would not leave the house now, so I told them I'd go check it out and that I'd be back in 2 shakes of a rabbit's tail. But first, I went into my room to grab the AR-15 just to be safe. I got into my Ranger and headed out. Once I pulled into the Marriott, I almost instantly had a pretty uneasy feeling. I made it to the spot they said they saw the people standing in the forest. Looking off into the woods, I could clearly see a large fire about 100 yards out. I sat and watched for a couple of minutes, just assuming it was a couple of campers who let their fire get a little bit too big. And that's when I heard the screaming for myself. It definitely wasn't coyotes. It was an ear-piercing scream, almost loud enough to bust your eardrums. It went on for a good 5 seconds before it turned into more of a psychotic howl than a scream, and at the same time, it sounded like there was more than one of them. After it stopped, I heard what I knew for a fact was a deer, screaming in agony loudly. I didn't know what they were doing to that poor animal, but I did not want to stick around and find out. When I got back to the house, I told them what I'd seen and heard. We stayed up that night, I guess protecting the house and ourselves. The very next day, my brother and I drove back to that area around noon to see if we could find anything that would tell us what was going on. We knew it was private property, but we didn't care at the time. We walked to where I saw the fire, and there was a large dugout in the ground with embers still glowing red. Off to the side were the remains of a buck. It had been cut open. We left as quickly as we could after that, and haven't been back there since, and I probably never will, because I'd rather not interrupt any of this satanic cult's work. Who knows what they'd do? The Child and the Man in Greece by Megan. I'm an 18-year-old girl from the middle of Ireland, and just finished high school when me and my friends had a brainwave to go backpacking across Europe. So in May, we set off on our new adventure to Greece. We ended up staying in a small hostel in the southeast of Greece. The scenery was fantastic, and the locals were very welcoming. But there were a few odd stares here and there, especially when you're with the people who I hung around with. I mean, sometimes we Irish folks aren't known to be too quiet. After hanging out at the bar, we checked into our hostel, which was just about the quality you'd expect for only 35 euros a night. But we were in our element. On our way there, we ended up spotting another bar, and decided to hang out there for a while, talking and singing with the locals. A lady behind the bar asked us where we were staying for the night, and naturally my friend answered and told her where. Now the moment she answered, everyone in that small bar seemingly stopped, and everything got silent. I mean, you could hear the clock ticking on the wall. After that, everyone was very off and did not want to talk to us anymore. They acted like we weren't just singing with them moments ago. Shortly after that, we left, and my friend, Lee, was not impressed with the sudden change of heart the people in the pub had with us. He was muttering to himself, while me and my other friend, Alfie, were too focused on getting back to the hostel, as one of us had had too much to drink. We got back and settled into our rooms, which 2 people had to share per room, so it was me and Alfie and Lee and Sarah. The rooms were okay in size and the beds weren't too bad, so we were satisfied enough. As I was doing my nightly routine, my blanket had gone missing that I brought from home. It was a blanket that I'd had since I was 3, and it meant a lot to me. After not being able to find it for a few minutes, I was freaking out. I went to wake up Alfie, and I told her that my blanket was missing. She personally knew how much it meant to me, and was equally confused as to where it had just vanished to. I know, and she knew, that I had had it with me when we got here. I was mad. After about an hour of turning the room entirely upside down, I gave up, as we needed to go to bed. At around 5:30 that morning, I woke up to a giggling sound, and I thought it was Lee. But I listened closely this time, and it sounded more like a little boy. Mind you, I never saw any children here, so I ignored it, until I began to hear light footsteps coming towards our room door, followed by a small knock. I froze. I knew it was a child, but it just took me by surprise, so when the knocks became more aggressive and harder, I got up and swung the door open, just to find nothing there. I was even more mad at this point, thinking, where are these kids' parents? I groaned as I got back in bed. The next morning, I woke up around 7:30 and got ready for another day of exploring. Everyone was up by then and ready for the day. We headed out, got some breakfast, and I ended up telling the receptionist what happened last night, concerning my blanket and the sound of the little boy. She looked at me confused and told me that there was no children staying that week. None of the families or couples there had kids. That's weird, I thought. My friends simply blamed it on a dream, but I couldn't stop thinking about it all day. Couldn't come up with a reason as to why there was a child running around at 5:30 in the morning, knocking on my door. I know it wasn't a dream. We spent that day at the local seaside. Then we came back to the hostel and had dinner. As I wasn't feeling my best, we ended up crashing early. But sure enough, something woke me up again around 5 a.m. This time I heard the footsteps inside our room. I froze in the spot and felt something sit on my bed. I held my eyes closed and prayed to whoever would listen that this thing would go away. Alfie, in the next bed, woke up too and screamed when she looked over my way. I opened my eyes quickly and saw that there was a full-grown man sitting on my bed staring at me. When he saw and heard Alfie scream, he simply disappeared into thin air. We were so scared and upset that we ended up in Lee and Sarah's room. We left early the next morning and literally threw our stuff into our bags, ready to head out. When I went down to the front desk to give our keys back, I told the woman there about my final experience. She was very understanding and apologized about my blanket. And as we were pulling away from that place, I looked back with Alfie, and sure enough, we saw a man and a little boy standing at our room window, holding my now red-stained blanket. Turns out that the place we were staying in, a man who was part of a cult had sacrificed a boy, according to the local police in the pub that we visited before we left Greece. It's been haunted for years, supposedly, and they say that the man and boy always take something that belongs to someone that stays in that room. When I heard this, I couldn't help but think, better than taking my life. Cult-Like Church by Katie M. Growing up, my family and I attended this church. I use the term church loosely because after a couple of years, things changed. They changed until the place became a full-blown cult that made us do weird things. I'm talking about making people crawl on the floor and growl like animals, along with a myriad of other things, which I won't get into. The longer we stayed there, the weirder things became. It wasn't just the people or pastors. There were strange occurrences that still creep me out to this day. My mom worked for the church for a long time, and one day she and I had to stop by it to do some things. At the time, I know for a fact it was just the two of us in the building alone. We were walking toward the back of the building when we passed by the sanctuary. I glanced through the window on one of the doors and saw a dark figure standing inside, a silhouette against the window. It startled me, but I thought it looked like one of the guys we knew. However, when we opened the door, there was no one there. On another occasion, it was my birthday, and everyone threw me a party at the church. A bunch of people were sitting in the sanctuary watching a slideshow of pictures of me, and at one point, my dad saw a man sitting in the back row, sort of laughing to himself and smiling as he watched the screen. He had never seen the man before, and when he looked for him later, the man was gone. I think someone else had seen him as well and had talked to him a little bit, but like I said, the guy seemingly disappeared before anyone could actually chat with him. On a different occasion, my dad also heard a woman's voice ask if he was leaving. When he turned around, he was alone. This happened one evening when he stepped outside during service for some fresh air, because they used to make us sit for hours on end in a stuffy sanctuary, listening to music with the same repetitive beats over and over, while people rolled on the floors. This was when my dad was ready to leave the place for good. He was only around to please my mom. That experience made his mind up completely, and as for him, he never went back. But the weirdest and creepiest thing by far that ever happened at that church occurred on a Wednesday evening, just a week before my family agreed to leave the church for good. I was 13 at the time, and I had made up my own mind that the place was insane, and just kind of went along with whatever I was told to do, while secretly smirking and rolling my eyes. I had spent years working and doing other things against my will there, and then they started adding all the other bizarre stuff, and I was so done. Well, one evening, they had the teenagers and a few adults in their early 20s praying in the fellowship hall of the church. Someone said that we needed to pray all around the building, so like good little cult monkeys, we followed right along. They led us into the foyer where we commenced praying. And here's where it gets weird. Even as I'm an adult now, I don't want to go into too many details. It still makes me feel intensely sick to recall what happened, both out of our sheer humiliation and disgust. My best friend of the time and I were standing beside each other. While the others were praying out loud, making noises and whatnot, I heard a loud scratching noise across the wall to my right, as if something with huge claws was crawling across it. I thought it was in my imagination. I looked over to my friend to gauge her reaction about it, and her eyes were massive as her jaw dropped low. I know she was hearing it as well. After mostly everyone left, a couple of 20-somethings chased a demon into a corner of the attic and forced it to leave. At least, that's what the crazy adults told us happened. I don't like dwelling on any of the stuff that occurred at that time of my life, but I also know that it messed me up for a long time. I still have a hard time if something even remotely reminds me of that place, and I instantly put a wall up. There are things about that place I won't even tell my husband about, and probably never will, because I know he wouldn't understand. I'm just so grateful my family got out of there when they did, because there are still many people who I grew up with that won't ever get away from it. Midnight Cult by GenericMetalGuy. When I was about 14, I made some unfortunate decisions. Back then, I was a part of a neo-Nazi group. I'm very ashamed of myself for what I once was, but believe me when I say I've moved way past it and have become very anti-fascist. But at the time, I was very, very racist. Our gang had about 50 members, and we called a relatively large town in Maine home. Now this town is known by all Mainers as the crap hole of Maine, but there was a large immigrant population, so a group of skinheads couldn't really operate in the open without suspicions. Now, we weren't violent skinheads, but we weren't opposed to fighting a rival group, and this story takes place when we were supposed to go fight a different gang who identified themselves as Crips, but they were just posers who wore blue to us. One of the members of the gang named Johnny called me up as I was walking home from school one day. "Hey man, couple of the Crips apparently jumped Davey." Davey was Johnny's little brother, and everyone in the gang was very protective of him. "We're gonna get some revenge tonight. You down?" Now, I was just let into the gang the week before, so I wasn't exactly gonna refuse. So I responded with a quick, "Heck yeah," before I put my phone away and ran home. That night, around 11 p.m., about 10 of my guys showed up at my house. I told my dad a quick, "We're gonna see a band in town." I had to lie to my dad because he wasn't a skinhead like we were. He nodded and told me to be safe. I ran out and greeted my friends. We started walking the mile and a half to the woods we were supposed to meet these Crips at. For about an hour, we were all bragging about how we were going to crack some heads. But that mood vanished when we made it to the woods. They were dark enough to scare the heck out of a bunch of young neo-Nazis. But Johnny was mad enough that he just marched to the trail that led into the dark, creepy woods. Hesitantly, we followed behind him. The whole way I felt like I was being watched from every angle from the second I entered the woods, and the moonlight made the trees look like they were alive, as if they had faces on them. Being surrounded by my friends made me feel invincible though, and brought my confidence back up. We marched for a good 5 minutes. Small chats were the only things breaking the terrifying silence, but even those were quick to be snuffed out by the eerie quiet. Johnny suddenly put his hand up. We all stopped and stood in the pale moonlight in the middle of some woods I was new to. "I think I see him," Johnny whispered to us. He pointed to the left. I turned my head to see a clearing. The moonlight showed several figures, and they all looked like they were talking to each other, so we naturally thought it was the gang members we were supposed to meet. I popped my knuckles and took a step forward, but Johnny put his hand on my chest to stop me. "What the heck are you doing? We've got the drop on them, dude." I whispered to Johnny, but he put a finger to his lips and pointed again. I turned my head, and I noticed him. A hooded figure emerging from the woods with a handful of sticks. He walked to the center of the clearing, then stood in the middle of a circle of figures. My curiosity grew. Even the others grew bizarrely quiet as we were entranced by what we stumbled upon. The guys behind me took a few steps forward. Luckily, none of our heavy boots made any of the sticks snap. One of the figures in the clearing took their hands out of their pockets. He must have had a match, because a small flame appeared in his hand and they started a fire. We were all prepared to just jump these guys and get it over with, so we could all go home since the early summer night was chilly and it was starting to get to me. We were about to make ourselves known when we were suddenly frozen in our tracks. One of the figures picked up a large trash bag that seemed to be filled to the brim with something. As this happened, several more people walked out of the woods behind the guys who were already next to the fire. I had the sudden urge to run, but I didn't want to be known as a coward in my gang, so I decided if anyone else ran, then I would go, but only then. I looked at the 9 other guys, and they were all staring in confusion at the gathering in front of us, so I turned my head and watched them too. A few loud greetings and laughs were shared by the group as they formed a much larger circle. The guy who had the trash bag reached into the bag, and what he dug out still haunts me to this day. Now what I'm about to tell you is very, very real, no matter how disturbing it sounds. What they pulled out of the bag was a man's head. I resisted the urge to scream or vomit, but one of our guys lost his battle and vomited loudly on the forest floor. I've never seen so many heads turn at the same time as the cloaked figures turned their attention towards us. "Run," Johnny yelled. We all bolted up the trail. Johnny, in a pulse of adrenaline, picked the new guy up who was still puking on the ground and put him under my shoulder and kept running. We all sprinted hard until we ran out of the woods and were all panting, staring back where we came, hoping, praying that we had lost them. "What the F was that?" I gasped. "I don't know," Johnny breathed. The new kid started bawling, and none of us could blame him. We decided that the fight with the other gang was not worth it, so we all just walked home. I'm 17 now and have long moved on out of that town, out of that personality. Luckily, a few of the guys in the gang decided to cut their ties with that gang too, but we're all on good terms, so it's not like I'm gonna curb stomp anybody soon. But I can't even bear to talk to my fellow ex-friends about that night. I think that memory is too grotesque, too perturbing to remember. We should have reported it to the police, but I was so scared of getting in trouble at the time, especially considering what our original plans were. I was a foolish kid. Unfortunately, cults still exist. New ones pop up every day, and they attempt to seduce and lure your children into a mindset that is often nearly impossible to get out of them. Once they're brainwashed, sometimes there's no going back. So keep your eye out for yourself, for your family, for your friends, because there are groups of people out there that either want to convert them or take them away from you forever. Good night. Be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe if you enjoyed the video. Don't forget to send me your true scary stories at darknessprevails.org. If you want to support this channel further, make sure the notification bell is clicked. You can also go to patreon.com/darknessprevails. For as long as you donate any amount to me, you'll have access to ad-free MP3 downloads of future episodes, and you'll get your name in the credits at the end of these videos. Or buy some merch by clicking the shop button below or the link in the description. Thank you. Now then, here are my 5 favorite early comments from my previous full episode about 10 true graveyard shift horror stories. Zeppelin Girl 86 says, "Here comes the giant rat." That's either a really terrible pickup line, a reference to a security guard story I did in the past, or a reference to Stephen King's Night Shift, I think. Basically, no matter what, that's a winning comment right there. Lita Wolf Webb says, "Thank you for posting as much as you do." Thank you for listening. The more I post, the healthier this channel is. Well, until I start posting 3 times a day. Let's hope I don't have to go that far. Cinco515 says, Graveyard Shift. I expect to see the hash-slinging slasher in one of these stories. I did think about putting him in the intro, but I thought about going straight creepy instead of funny. But still, that's a classic. Javier says, normal people in bed at 1 a.m. My college homework isn't that merciful. Oh, college. Turning children into exhausted zombies forever. Good times. Good times. And Hoshi Shiro says, night shift is always tiring. I'm a night owl kind of guy, but I just hate working at night. Of course, if you're a night owl, then you want your free time at night. Nobody wants to work through their favorite hours. Anyways, guys, that brings us to the end of another Darkness Prevails episode. More scary stories are coming soon, so stay tuned. Until next time, here are the credits to my patrons who continue to donate. They're awesome people. Remember, stay safe out there and stay creepy, because this world is a strange one.